We're now in public session, members, and can I ask you, so we're going to move now to item number 6, which is agreed minutes. Members, at our last meeting on the 22nd of January, the committee agreed that I would approve the minutes of proceedings so they could be included in the inquiry report published on that day. So for members' information, a copy of the agreed minutes can be found at pages 194 to page 200 of your meeting pack. Are members content to note? Yeah, thank you, members. Item number 7, matters arising. Can I remind members that during the committee's deliberations at last week's meeting on the inquiry report for Regulation EU 2025-2509 on the safety of toys, we agreed to write to the Paymaster General and the Secretary of State reiterating our disappointment that OPSS officials did not provide oral evidence during the inquiry, and asking again that officials from all relevant British Government departments and agencies engage directly with the committee as and when necessary. Members, a draft letter has been included in today's meeting pack and it can be found at pages 202 and 203. Are members content to issue the letter as drafted? Yeah, thank you, members. We'll move on now to item number 8, members, and it's a COM 2025-553, and it's a proposal for a regulation amending the CMO regulation. And just to inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard. Can I refer members to the relevant papers at page 6 to 188 of your meeting pack? An assessment of impact from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs can be found at pages 82 to 87 of your meeting pack. And in line with agreed processes, departmental officials were provided with questions in advance to be answered as part of the oral evidence session today. Officials were also asked to share the responses in writing before the meeting if possible, and these have been emailed yesterday evening to members and the hard copies have been provided. So now I'm going to welcome Samantha Swan, who is head of poultry, meat, eggs, dairy, wines and spirits, hops and hemp policy. Very much welcome, Samantha. And Samantha Stewart, head of food security, beef, pigs and sheep policy from the department. So just whenever you're ready, Samantha's, please brief the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak to you today on the proposal for amending Regulation 1308 of 2013, establishing a common organisation of the markets. I'm Samantha Swan and I hold policy responsibility within DERA for EU marketing standards for a number of agricultural sectors such as poultry, meat, eggs and hemp marketing, and I work alongside my colleague Samantha Stewart, whose remit includes responsibility for beef and pig meat policy and marketing. The proposal under consideration today implements a range of changes emanating from the European Commission's A Vision for Agriculture and Food, which aims to ensure a competitive, resilient and sustainable EU agricultural sector. The regulation being amended, Regulation 1308 of 2013, is commonly referred to as the Common Market Organisation Regulation, or the CMO, and it covers a wide range of agricultural policy areas. Many of the proposed amendments don't fall under the Windsor framework, including those relating to the EU school schemes for fruit and veg and milk, rules on sectoral interventions and the availability of supplies in times of emergencies and securities. However, there are 3 key proposals which do fall under Annex 2 of the Windsor framework, and these are the addition of agricultural products to the list of products which marketing standards may apply, broader hemp import rules and restrictions on the use of some meat-related terms. Firstly, the CMO regulation is amended to add additional agricultural products to the list of products to which marketing standards may apply. Marketing standards is the collective term given by the European Union to a range of sector-specific rules that include establishing definitions, setting minimum product standards, production methods, sales descriptions, production categories and labelling requirements. They can apply at all stages of the marketing chain and are intended to protect the consumers and to facilitate the trade of applicable goods on the single market. Products currently subject to marketing standards include fruit and vegetables, hops, eggs for eating, hatching eggs and chicks, olive oil, poultry meat and spreadable fats. Some examples of a marketing standard would be the criteria for grading Class A and Class B eggs based on their quality and weight, or the definition of a chicken breast fillet. The new products added by the proposal are protein crops, such as dried leguminous vegetables like peas, kidney beans and lentils, and soybeans, beef, pig meat, sheep meat, goat meat and cheese. The proposal itself doesn't create these new marketing standards, as these would be outlined in potential future implementing legislation if the Commission chose to exercise the powers in the future. The EU's current marketing standards requirements vary widely from product to product. Therefore, the detail on the specific marketing standards for each of the proposed new sectors or products aren't known at this time. The second key proposal, which applies under the Windsor framework, is to expand the range of hemp products, i.e. products derived from low THC hemp which can be imported into the EU. In addition to raw true hemp and hemp seeds for sowing or not for sowing, it will now include other parts of the hemp plant, and this includes the flowers and leaves of the plant. The Commission is seeking to ensure that all parts of the hemp plant are considered agricultural products in the EU, and the changes to the hemp import rules is to align with the addition of these same hemp products to EU production and marketing rules to ensure consistency. Those production and marketing articles don't apply under the Windsor framework. The THC content of imported hemp, hemp seeds for sowing and other parts of the hemp product are limited at 0.3%. A derogation is also in place to include the importation of high THC products for medical and scientific use. THC is the principal psychoactive constituent of cannabis. We're advised by the Home Office that under the current UK drug law, the importation of the other parts of the hemp plant, such as flowers and leaves, regardless of the THC content, would still be prohibited for anything other than scientific or medicinal purposes, which would require a licence from the Home Office. The remaining key proposal made by the regulation is to provide a new legal definition of meat and meat products, and to restrict the use of 30 meat-related terms only to those products derived exclusively from meat or composite products where no non-meat takes place of any meat constituent. These include terms like chicken, brisket, drumstick and bacon, but notably terms such as steak, burger and sausage aren't listed.
Right, just excuse me, does that mean they're, just to, so I get it right in my mind, does that mean that they're not allowed the terms steak, burger and sausage, or does that just mean that they're under...
Steak, burger and sausage will continue to be allowed,
yeah,
but things like chicken, brisket and bacon won't be.
Bacon? Okay.
So our assessment of each of these three proposals is that it is unlikely that they would have a significant impact in Northern Ireland. In particular, the main impact from any future marketing standards or restrictions on the use of the meat terms is that the requirements would apply to all such products produced and sold in Northern Ireland. Northern Irish producers of applicable products intended for sale here or the EU would have to comply with the new requirements. The local agri-food sector is heavily weighted towards beef and milk production, which combined makes up over half of the agricultural sector's gross output. It is estimated that cheese production accounts for between a fifth to a quarter of the milk produced. Pig meat would represent around a tenth of output and sheep around a 20th. So it would mainly be our local beef, pig meat, sheep meat and cheese sectors that would potentially have to comply with any new marketing standards, and what those standards are and whether the changes, whether they would require changes to current production and marketing practices isn't known at this stage. The Department doesn't collect data on Northern Ireland food producers producing or selling meat alternative vegan and vegetarian products, as they aren't agricultural products themselves, but we are anecdotally aware of some producers, but we're not currently aware of any products being sold that wouldn't comply with the meat-related proposals. The requirements would not apply to products moving from GB to Northern Ireland under the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, known as NIRMS, or to Northern Irish products heading for sale in GB. However, the requirements would still apply to products moving outside of this scheme. When we look at the number of consignments of the new marketing standards products moving from GB to Northern Ireland outside of NIRMS, the largest consignments would be for cheese and curd, representing nearly 3/4 of the total, followed by beef and pig meat, making up the bulk of the remaining quarter. There would only be a handful of sheep meat and goat meat and protein consignments. Regarding the meat-related terms, there is no specific commodity code linked to meat alternative or vegan or vegetarian products, as their composition and ingredients could vary. However, we would expect that the majority of such products could continue to be moved under norms. Of the local agricultural sector's output sales for milk and milk products, which would include cheese, it's fairly split evenly between UK and EU sales. For beef and sheep meat, UK sales would represent over 4/5 and the EU under 1/5. For pig meat, EU sales would represent around 1/10, with the rest heading mostly to GB. As with imports, the Department doesn't collect data on Northern Ireland food producers producing and selling meat alternative, vegan or vegetarian products. If the regulation did not apply, Northern Ireland producers of applicable products intended for sale in the EU would still have to ensure their product complies with the EU requirements, but not if the product was to be sold here or in GB. For marketing standards in general, having a standardised production or accepted definitions for certain agricultural products can facilitate trade and be helpful for consumers and purchases, especially when distance selling or the purchaser is unsighted on the goods themselves. However, the Department isn't aware of any consumer body or industry representatives calling for greater regulation in these agricultural products to which the new marketing standards may apply. Similarly, relating to the use of certain terms, such as the proposal around the meat-related terms, could help to ensure consumers are well informed around food products and aren't misled. The Food Standard Agency Northern Ireland is responsible for general food labelling and for food information for consumers, which states that information including in relation to a product's properties or composition shall not be misleading. Therefore, it could be argued that the proposal on meat-related terms is merely solidifying that requirement. Again, as with new market and standards sectors, the Department is not aware of any consumer body or industry representative requests for greater regulation in these meat-related terms, nor has the Department received any complaints that consumers have been misled by the marketing of non-meat products. I hope you find this overview of the proposal useful. Thank you for your time and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Samantha. Any questions? Peter?
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the Samanthas this morning. I'm just going to take you to the questions that you've applied to here and just walk you through a couple, if that's okay, just to help me in terms of clarity around some of these issues. Question 3 was asking really about the impact of labelling changes and how many businesses that affected. And the second paragraph notes that there are 72 firms across beef, sheep meat, milk, etc. It's the bottom of that page. And then if you go over the page, there's a paragraph around other local processors, and at the end of that you cite 178 businesses, although some of those might do more than one product, I would assume, which sort of adds up to about 250. So are you saying that that's the sort of quantum of businesses to which this new labelling regime may apply?
So that's our best estimate based on the data that the Department holds. It's worth noting that we don't know what the labelling requirements are going to be at this time, and that will fall with more specific legislation, probably sector by sector. So it might be the case that no changes are required and what producers are already producing will be in line with what the requirements are, but potentially, according to our data, that's our best estimates.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of takes me on maybe to the next one, which is the next paragraph, which you've just actually covered off, but I suppose what I'd say from the committee's perspective is, and I take your point that we don't know, but I suppose from our perspective we have to look after the best interests of producers here in Northern Ireland, and if there is, we have to consider well, at least in this case, the worst case scenario, that these labelling requirements come in and they apply across the board. So it's, I suppose from our perspective, it's about getting an idea about how widespread that is and how deep an issue that would be for the people who it affects. If I take you on then to your answer on question 7, you said there, just question 7, first paragraph, how the department is not aware of any consumer body or industry requests for greater regulation of those agricultural products to which new marketing standards may apply. Just in that sentence, are you saying that no one has approached you saying we would really like these new standards? Is that what it means?
Yeah, that's what it means. Nobody has approached us.
So you've had no one coming to you saying, like, we'd really like this change. Okay. Just staying on that one, just the next paragraph. You said there that similarly, regulating the use of certain items, such as the proposal around meat-related terms, could help ensure that consumers are well informed about food products, and you mentioned that in your oral evidence, and are not misled. Just that phrase, are you suggesting that consumers are currently being misled? Because surely the Food Standards Agency would ensure that that's not the case. It was a curious way of framing that statement.
So I think that's the reason behind the proposals, is to stop the misleading. But the Food Standards Agency is responsible for the food information and consumers legislation, and it already provides to ensure that consumers aren't misled by their labelling. It would probably just reinforce that.
Yeah. So do we need these to make sure that people are currently not being misled? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from. I think that's the policy intent, and the argument behind the policy is, do these terms mislead by their nature? Because I don't think there's many people are getting confused, but that's
Okay.
the...
Yeah, no, I get that. So I think you've got the tenor of my argument here is that currently I would say people aren't being misled, because the Food Standards Agency would make sure of that, and if they were, they would take action on them. So I'm not really sure if people are currently not being misled, how relabeling stuff will suddenly mean they're not being misled in the future. That's certainly my perspective, but
just a thought. I think it's to strengthen the position for the farmer to add additional protections for those terms is the policy driver behind that one.
okay. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, please. Thanks very much indeed. So thanks both Samantha's for coming in. I'm just going to focus in on the questions and the rest of it. But first of all, the UK government produced an EM, and it said that there was only going to be limited impact. I tend to get very nervous when the British government says limited impact, because it's impact to whom, which concerns me. But I think we've got some of the answers, and thank you for the answers that came through. It's 250 businesses. That's a lot of the agribusiness sector. So that's a significant amount of businesses are going to be affected by this. But when you talk about consignments, and there's 1,176 consignments per month, is there any way you can give us what sort of volume that's like, or what sort of value that's about? Because I imagine when you say consignment, that could be anything from a container full to, like one parcel.
It's not loaded, it's not recorded as a volume, it is purely just consignment, so we don't hold that data.
So it could be, and I'm just mindful of, particularly in the cheese business, I mean, they send container loads of this stuff to places like Street in England for turning into cheese and all the rest of it. So this could be, one consignment could be like 20 containers.
Potentially.
Okay, so we're not actually talking about, even though it says 1,176, we could be potentially talking about an awful lot of stuff.
Potentially, we don't know.
I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just wanted to know if you ever had that data there, and it might be useful maybe for the committee, or at least I would like to know roughly what the value of those consignments are in a an indicative way, and what sort of the volume are we talking about, because I think that's quite an important thing. So basically what will happen if any of the things being produced is to go to the EU, it has to have this labelling on it, change the labelling. If it goes to GB, it has to have the GB labelling on it, because the EU labelling won't be compatible with the GB labelling, will it?
So under the UK Internal Market Act, what is produced in Northern Ireland to EU rules will be allowed to be sold in GB under the EU rules.
But it would still have to have GB labelling on it, because there's no way Tesco's is going to. Sorry, there are other supermarket chains available. There's no way Tesco's is going to take something that has got an EU plunk on it and it doesn't have a GB similar designation on it as well.
That would be.
No, my understanding is if it's produced here and it'll be accepted in GB with the current EU labelling that we use currently, or that NI producers will use.
Okay, right. I just wonder what the markets, particularly in England, Scotland, and Wales, will take to stuff that's coming through. That there's already been questions about product coming from Northern Ireland that isn't deemed to be British, which has been a problem. So again, that would have a concern about that, and I wouldn't mind if there's any sort of information about that. So where does the not for EU labelling bit come into then? Because if they're producing it solely for GB in Northern Ireland, they have to stick a not for EU label on it as well, don't they?
Yes, so if there's products being produced labelled with the UK product, it's allowed to be sold in Northern Ireland with the GB label, but it has to have the not for EU label on it as well.
So even though it's the same stuff, it'll have not for EU on it, and the only difference is they'll take the not for EU label off it and keep the same label on it and send it to the EU.
Say that again, sorry.
So at the moment, if it's produced for Northern Ireland and GB, or particularly for Northern Ireland, it has to have not for EU on it, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay. So therefore, if it's going to go to the EU, even though it's the same lump of cheese, you will take the not for EU off it, and then it'll be fully acceptable in the EU because it's made to the same standards.
GB to EU, so.
And for some commodities as well, the labelling differs. So some of it has to be specified on the product, but some of it is just shelf labelling or pallet labelling as opposed to on the specific product as well. So I think it would depend product to product what way that would work.
Have we had any indications from industry what the likely cost of this is going to be?
There's no specific detail in the proposals. There's nothing to ascertain cost. I would just mention that beef currently has marketing standards in place. Sheep meat and pig meat wouldn't have at this point in time, but until we see the proposals from the EU, if there is even going to be any proposals from the EU as to how they're going to apply the marketing standards, it would be difficult to quantify.
Just a piece of your evidence, because we were talking about designations and you mentioned the word bacon wasn't going to be allowed to use, but on the list they actually have the word bacon down, thankfully.
Yes, so what's nothing but saying is that you couldn't have like vegan bacon going forwards.
Right. Okay. So basically, it just has to be meat, and so you couldn't have it. You couldn't have a vegetable sausage roll.
Sausage is not covered under these proposals.
All right. So you could have a vegetable sausage roll.
Under these proposals, yes.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks.
Okay, David?
No, with Chair, I think Steve at the end just re-clarified what I was going to, because I think we had commentary around. I think we had some commentary in the media and so on around the vegan and vegetable sausage rolls and burgers and so on. So I think you brought clarity that they won't be affected as maybe had been envisaged by some.
I think it's probably helpful to say that there's two current proposals dealing with these terms. So there's this one that's in front of you now and one that you've previously considered, which is the strengthening of positions of farmers in the food chain, which is 2024-577, and it's the one that deals with the sausage terms, and that's currently still in there, and it's with the EU in trialogue.
Thanks for that clarity, I appreciate that. And so Steve dealt with that, Chair, but I would just say that I think it's another issue where we're handing over control of these marketing issues to the EU before we know what secondary legislation is going to bring. So it's unsatisfactory, but there we go. Thanks, Chair.
Hey, David. Owen, did you want to?
Yeah, please, Chair. Thank you, and thank you for the evidence. It's been really clear and really helpful. Can I just ask, is this likely to have any intersection with the SPS veterinary agreement that's coming forward? Is it likely that there will be any harmonisation in that space as a result of whatever's negotiated?
Obviously negotiations are still ongoing, but I think it's been in the public domain that marketing standards are in the scope of those negotiations, and should they be included, then there will be dynamic alignment with these marketing standards across the UK.
That's really helpful, Samantha. Thank you very much. That's me, Chair.
Okay, no, thank you. Peter?
If that's possible, thank you, Chair. I just want to be sure about this. So if these come in, we still can have vegan sausages, but not vegan bacon. Is that right? Okay. But at some point in the future, we might not have vegan sausages as well.
It depends on the sequence.
On what happens, and there's
proposals.
stuff coming down the tracks.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm just stunned. It's not to you. I'm just stunned by the fact that this is happening. You know, that you can have a level of dichotomy between two products that are both meat based. That I assume vegetarians want to eat something that is kind of like bacon. I'm not a vegetarian, and they'll be able to eat one product and maybe not eat the other, or they can eat both, but they'll be called different things. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Just
checking. The clarity is, I guess, that the one is about a cut of meat rather than a processed product. So they're basically saying that anything that is seen to be something that is you said brisket, you know, that's a specific cut of meat. Bacon might be seen to be a specific cut of meat, whereas the processed product itself is not seen to be. That's something that's produced from the meat, and that's where is that right?
Potentially, we're trying to ascertain from.
Add yourself. No, fair enough. I'm not the confusion. Thanks, sure.
No other members any questions? So can I thank both Samantha Swan and Samantha Stewart this morning for your written response, and likewise your response to members this morning. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members. So I'd just like to ask members now, do members wish to monitor the progress of the proposed regulation COM 2025-553 as it progresses through the EU legislative system?
I think that'll be
I think
yes.
that'd be a good idea.
Yes. Okay.
I think even Declan would agree to that.
Okay, members. So thank you, members, for that. The Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs provides a revised assessment, so we'll ask as a follow-up now, a revised assessment of impact if any changes to the text are proposed by the Council of the EU or the European Parliament, which would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of our communities here in a way that is liable to persist. And that RAISE monitors the progress of the proposal and submits quarterly updates to the committee. Members should note that the committee can decide to hold an inquiry at any time into any proposed replacement act that it is monitoring. So members are content for both those actions?
Sure.
Yes. Yep. Thank you, members. So members, going to move on now to item number 9, COM 2025-822, proposal for a regulation as regards defence readiness and facilitating defence investments and conditions for defence industry. Just to inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard, and can I refer members to the relevant papers at page 88 to 140 of your meeting pack. Members, just to remind you that this and the following proposal, the committee agreed to ask RAISE to identify key representatives who may be affected by the proposed acts, and the list can be found at page 109 and page 177 of your meeting pack. And just to advise members likewise that an assessment of impact from the Department of the Economy can be found at page 130 of your meeting pack. And one from the Department of Justice can be found at page 135 of your meeting pack, and one from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs can be found at page 138 of your meeting pack. So without further ado, can I welcome Dr. Jennifer Stewart, who is Head of Firearms and Explosives Branch with the Department of Justice, Sarah Jane Murphy, Senior Scientific Officer, Chemical and Industrial Pollution Policy from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and Mr. Mark McGregor, Head of Trade and Windsor Framework Branch, the Department of the Economy. So you are very welcome. And just whenever you are ready, members, I'll ask you just to brief the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for your introduction, and good morning to everyone in the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to give evidence on behalf of DFE today. I'll be leading the evidence, but I'm joined by officials from DERA and the Department of Justice, reflecting the cross-departmental nature of the proposal. Although the defence is an accepted matter, 7 Northern Ireland departments have an interest due to their responsibilities under chemicals and environmental legislation. Defence is an accepted matter under the Northern Ireland Act, meaning responsibility rests solely with the UK Government and is outside the legislative competence of the departments. Our briefing and evidence today rely on the input of officials from UKG. DERA and DFE share competence for the registration, evaluation, authorisation and registration of chemicals regulation, referred to as REACH. DFE and the Department of Justice share competence for classification, labelling and packaging regulation, known as CLP. DERA holds competences for the persistent organic pollutants, known as POPs, and DFE holds competence for the biocidal products regulation, known as BPR. I'd like to begin by briefly outlining the scope and purpose of the proposed regulation. The proposal forms part of the Defence Readiness Omnibus within the EU and amends 5 EU regulations. 4 of these regulations are listed in Annex 2 of the Windsor Framework, meaning that amendments will apply in Northern Ireland subject to the democratic scrutiny process. The proposal amends Regulation 1907/2006 REACH, Regulation 1272/2008 CLP, Regulation 528/2012 biocidal products, Regulation 2019-1021 POPs. There's also an amendment to Regulation 2021/697 on the European Defence Fund. This 5th regulation is not within scope of the Windsor Framework and will not apply in Northern Ireland, subject to democratic scrutiny. The amendments all broaden the scope for national defence exemptions for certain substances, mixtures and articles across the EU. As the first 4 acts are listed in Annex 2 of the Windsor Framework, these new EU provisions will automatically apply unless otherwise disapplied through the democratic scrutiny process. On the initial assessment of impact from the UK Government's assessment and analysis undertaken by DFE and partner departments, for REACH, the proposed amendments align with the existing UK definition of defence exceptions. No practical implications are anticipated, and the REACH exemption decisions can continue to apply across the entire UK. For CLP and BPR, Northern Ireland's current defence exemptions arrangements under CLP and BPR are already consistent with the proposed EU changes. Again, no practical implications are expected, and the existing approach to exemptions can continue unchanged. For POPs, DERA has advised that the changes relate primarily to the management of PFAS and military equipment. The amendments require the Commission and Member States to consider defence readiness when evaluating substances under the Stockholm Convention and enable Member States to exempt certain reporting obligations where national security requires it. No practical implications are anticipated for Northern Ireland, and UK-wide exemption processes can continue as they do now. Across all 4 regulations, they do not alter how exemptions are currently applied in the UK or Northern Ireland, and there is anticipated to be no practical effect. Chair, I hope this overview has been helpful, and we're very happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I think you're very concise and clear and brief, so thank you. Steve?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, all these things are already covered under NATO STANAGs, which is the agreement Standfast, the Republic of Ireland and Austria, which are not in NATO, but everybody else is. These are all covered by NATO STANAGs and NATO standing agreements. Has there been any discussion with the MOD about sort of how this deviates from any of the standard NATO designations?
We haven't had engagement with the Ministry of Defence. Our engagement has been with our partner departments who are involved in chemicals policy.
Yeah.
So if there has been engagement, we would have to ask the partner departments what's that been about. There's a real difficulty here. This is an accepted matter rather than a reserved matter, and the officials' ability or mandate the Act and actually our clearances to engage and investigate some of these matters are quite restricted.
Yeah. But obviously, there's certain parts of our industry here in Northern Ireland operate with explosives and do particular explosives and do things in the military reign. So one of the issues is going to be, as we go forward, I mean, these are EU regulations that basically map what's already happening through NATO. Mm-hmm. So is there one question I would have, is there any slippage between what the EU are asking here and what's already within the NATO STANAGs? I don't think there is, because I know that the EU is trying to get itself aligned with NATO rather than the other way around. But it'd just be interesting to know that, because obviously there's certain industries in Northern Ireland would be involved, either in explosives or particular chemicals for various other sort of activities to do with that. And it also covers things like fuel additives for aviation fuel and things like that. So it's there are other areas that might need looking at. That's fine. That's the only question I have.
Thank you, Steve. Any other questions, members? There's no further questions. So thanks to Jennifer, Mark and Sarah for coming along this morning. Really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
So members, I'm going to put the question to members. Wish to monitor the progress of the proposed regulation COM 2025-822 as it progresses through the EU legislative system? No? Okay. Thank all members are in agreement. Thank you, members. So we're now just going to move on now to item number 10, and which is COM 2025-823, proposal for a directive as regards the simplification of intra-EU transfers of defence-related products and the simplification of security and defence procurement. And can I refer members to page 142 to 192 of your meeting pack? Can I advise members that in line with agreed processes, a departmental assessment of impact was requested in order to assist the committee in deciding whether to monitor the proposal. However, to date, no assessment of impact has been received. Right. Officials in the Executive Office have stated that, as this is an accepted matter, departments are not in a position to provide input or advice or to speak to the initiative. The Secretariat requested confirmation of whether there has been any assessment by relevant departments of the proposal's impact here, or whether any such assessment is planned. TEO officials stated that they have contacted the Department for the Economy, the Department of Finance and the Department of Justice, and each advised that it was not for them to comment and therefore cannot assess. As the relevant EU legislation amended by this proposal was not included on TEO's list of orphan files, the Secretariat has asked for clarification. So further in line with the agreed processes, the Cabinet Office was asked whether the British Government has undertaken any engagement with departments here on the proposal. Officials state that the executive departments were not engaged during the drafting of the EM, as there is no appropriate individual or team which is responsible for strategic export controls. They state that they remain able to speak to the executive should it be necessary, and would expect them to continue monitoring this proposal due to its direct application here in the North. So members, having considered the legal advice and the British Government's EM, do members wish to monitor the progress of the proposed directive?
Sorry, Chair, could I just come in there a second?
Yes.
Just before we go to do that, I think it's a very interesting piece of legislation, and it's a pity we didn't have anybody from the Department of Economy to speak to it, because the way it's set up, people will be aware that in Spain there was legislation to ban any impact with working with Israeli companies, but Airbus, who use lots of defence equipment from Israeli companies, got an exemption through the Spanish, and they quoted this particular piece of legislation. I think it's really interesting because, of course, we have the Minister for Economy who said on the, I can't remember what date it was in October, was it the 16th of October, the 26th of October, that there was to be no interaction with defence industries with Israel. Yet we have a piece of EU legislation that's quite categorically saying that you will work with defence equipment across the whole of the EU, no matter what's in it. I think it's I have no problem with this piece of legislation at all. I think it's fairly unique for me to say that about stuff that's coming from the EU, but I think it's a good piece of legislation, and it helps our defence industry work more, and it also puts in place the position of the Economy Minister in her statement, which I don't think has any relevance whatsoever, and definitely it's against EU directives. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We'll swiftly move now to the question. Having considered the legal advice and the British Government's EM, do members wish to monitor the progress of the proposed directive COM 2025-823 as it progresses through the EU legislative process?
No.
No, I think that's unanimous. Thank you. So we're going to move on now to item number 11, which is COM 2023-769, and it's a proposal for a regulation on the welfare of dogs and cats and their traceability. Just to remind members that at our meeting on the 11th of December 2025, the committee considered an update from RAISE which highlighted that the Council and Parliament had reached a provisional agreement on this proposal. The committee agreed to request an updated assessment of impact from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, which can be found at pages 214 to 220 of your meeting pack. So I'm going to invite Jessica to speak on this item, if members are content. Jessica, yes?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a proposed new act which has been approved by the relevant committee in the European Parliament, and a plenary vote on the final text is expected at the end of March. It has been informally flagged to the committee back in May 2024 by the Cabinet Office, and at that stage, as usual, the committee requested an assessment of impact and also consulted stakeholders and got quite a few responses, mostly from animal welfare charities, which welcomed the provisions in the proposal. Some said it could go further in some areas, or that domestic legislation could do more and sooner. The Belfast City Council also responded, and they highlighted some costs to implement some if it's given new responsibilities under the proposal. At that stage, the committee also wrote to the UK government asking for more information, and more recently has asked DERA how the EU proposal on cats and dogs would interact with planned domestic policy changes in this area. So those documents and the responses I mentioned are all on the website. And following the provisional agreement, the committee asked DERA for an updated assessment, which is in your packs there. So I'm just going to set out some further actions that the committee might want to consider taking, one of which is to consult stakeholders again, given that Belfast City Council had said, given the deadlines, that they hadn't been able to take that through its formal committee structure. And more recently, the Dogs Trust has also inquired about whether there would be an opportunity for further consultation. So now the provisional text is available. The committee might want to consider launching the public consultation again. And the committee might also want to ask the UK government for another update along similar lines to its previous correspondence. In the EM, the government had said it was engaging with the European Commission, seeking further information on the operation of the proposals, the evidence underpinning the request for the proposals to apply in Northern Ireland, potential impacts, and the equivalency process and its application, and the potential to apply a specific agreement with the EU. In its previous response, they'd said that they were continuing to engage the Commission. And then finally, if the committee is writing to the UK government, they might also want to ask whether a future SPS agreement with the EU would cover this policy area as well.
Okay, thank you. So just based on that summary of where we are to date, are members content to take the actions as outlined, which is to write to the British government and likewise to launch a citizen space survey on the provisional text with a deadline of 4 weeks from now? Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. We'll move on now to item number 12, COM 2025-137 proposal for a regulation as regards certain market rules and sectoral support measures in the wine sector and for aromatised wine products. Can I inform members that raised status update, which can be found at pages 222 to 225 of the meeting pack, states that provisional agreement on the proposal was reached in December. Can I ask members, are they content to request a revised assessment of impact from the relevant departments on the provisionally agreed text, or confirmation from the relevant departments that their initial assessment of impact still stands? Yeah, great, thank you, members. Move on now to item number 13, COM 2024-561, proposal for a directive on measuring instruments. Can I inform members that raises status update can be found at page 227 to 229 of your meeting pack. The provisional agreement was approved by the relevant European Parliament Committee in December, and the proposal now awaits formal adoption by the Parliament and Council. So at this stage, are members content to request a revised assessment of impact from the relevant departments on the provisionally agreed text, or likewise confirmation from the relevant departments that their initial assessment of impact still stands?
Is it worth waiting until after if the vote on it being adopted on the 9th?
Well, the text is
Won't change.
already available, so normally it's only kind of
Fair enough.
small
Rubber stamping.
tweaks, and then the next opportunity would be when it's published, I suppose, the next key point. So
Fair enough.
Is that all right?
Grand.
Okay, thank you. If we're happy enough, we're going to move on now to item number 14, which is COM 2023-411, proposal for a regulation on plants obtained by the certain new genomic techniques and their food and feed. That word gets me all the time. Can I inform members that RAID status update can be found at pages 231 to 234 of your meeting pack? I'm just going to invite Jessica, likewise, to speak on this one.
thank you, Chair. So yeah, this proposal is really it would allow plant varieties that are more resistant to climate extremes and droughts to be produced. So things like pest-resistant apples or non-browning lettuce. I'm sure you've heard of other sort of crops that could be produced from these new techniques. There's a bit more going on with this proposal in terms of UK government legislation as well. The update in your pack notes that the provisional agreement was reached, and yesterday that was approved by the European Parliament Committee, and a vote is expected in April, and then the Council will also have to go through its formal approval processes. So previously in May, an assessment of impact was requested, and DERA said at that stage it wasn't possible to assess the likely impacts. In England, the Precision Breeding Act applies in this area, so that would have some similarities with the EU proposal, but also some differences. And also to note in this area that the UK is, of course, negotiating the SPS agreement with the EU, which might have an impact, and the government has said that the EU has accepted there will need to be a number of areas where it needs to retain its own rules. The committee previously wrote to the UK government asking for clarity about the applicability of the Act, so which parts would apply under Article 13.3 as replacement, and which would apply under Article 13.4 as new provisions. The committee also consulted stakeholders and got one response from the Ulster Farmers Union, which said they needed more information about those issues, so how it would interact with UK legislation and the SPS agreement. So in terms of the suggested actions, the committee might want to ask UKG for an update on the SPS negotiations with the EU and how that might impact divergence in this area across the UK, and might also want to ask if there's any updated information on which parts would apply under Article 13.3 or 13.4 of the Windsor framework. And then similar to the other proposals, we'd suggest that the committee request an updated assessment of impact from DERA and the FSA, and as part of that, the committee might want to ask DERA about their engagement with stakeholders, because they'd said this would only happen once provisions were agreed, as well as asking the department for to set out the differences between the UK and the proposed EU's regime, any implications for the movement of seeds to Northern Ireland, which was an issue which was raised before, and engagement, DERA's engagement with the UK government on the proposal and on the SPS agreement.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. So just based on that summary, Steve, do you want to...
Just a quick one. It's interesting how the language is used. It's talking about novel genomic techniques, but it doesn't talk about GM modified. And I think that was an area that's been expressed to me by some of the farmers in Northern Ireland about that issue. So maybe I think we probably need to find out a bit more about what they're actually referring to, because I think the language of that has changed subtly, and I'm not quite sure where it is. And as to the SPS agreement, I think Nick, Tim and Simmons made it very clear that the discussions are completely off limits until they get to the point in 2027, which is going to be the earliest point where they're actually going to be in a position to actually say what it's going to be. And then only if the agreement is made in 2027 will the future legislation follow on from 2027 onwards. And I think we're probably looking at a divergence here that could be for some quite considerable time. But I just like to have more information on that. I don't want us going down the GM route by default.
Well, obviously we can take those.
Yeah, ask for
Questions.
specific information on that to
Questions,
be
yeah.
included
I mean,
in
sorry.
the assessment.
Yeah, my PhD's in international relations. This has never been in plant pathology. I've got a poor clue. It's yeah.
So just based on that, and obviously further questions that Steve has raised, are members content then to take the actions as outlined to request a revised assessment of impact with those specific details and those that Jessica had outlined, and to ask the British Government also about the application of the post-EU Act here, and likewise Steve has in your outline about the SPS, but I think we should raise it anyway in relation to the SPS negotiations.
I would love it. We got
Yeah.
some information from it, but you know, I'm not holding out any hope.
Okay, thank you, members. So we're going to move on to item number 15, which is committee travel, and I'm going to invite Chris to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chair. So members might recall that back at our informal meeting, the committee had initially tasked the Secretariat with exploring options in and around March for visits both to Brussels and to Westminster. We've gone and done some scoping and some digging out information in relation to that I wanted to update members on. I'll turn to Brussels first. Members had previously said that broadly the purpose for that visit would be exploring the Commission work programme for 2026 and then also engaging with the permanent representation of Ireland ahead of Ireland assuming the Council presidency in July. With those purposes in mind, we have been speaking with the team at ONIEB on optimal timings for a visit. Members might recall we did the same this time last year, and they provided some quite helpful steers on when we might have our best bet in terms of getting availability from MEPs and actually when those discussions would be most useful for the committee. So we've sought steers on a similar basis for them again this time. There's probably a few useful takeaways from those discussions. One is that according to the European Commission's indicative timings, most of the proposals in the work programme that are relevant to this committee are expected to commence their passage in Q2 onwards, so after March. In addition to that, our understanding is now that March is probably too early for the permanent representation of Ireland to give us much in the way of a clear indication of their priorities for the presidency. Also, March probably presents some practical difficulties between pre-planned ONIEB engagements, which might sort of limit our use of their offices as our sort of base camp as we've done before. Busy schedules both for members and for ONIEB in and around St Patrick's Day, and then also the Easter break falling not long after that. With those things in mind, March might not be an optimal time to take the visit, either in terms of practicality or in terms of the value we would get. ONIEB have advised that April might in fact be a better option on both of those fronts, without being so close to Ireland assuming that Council presidency that their own availability is limited. In sort of digging down into that further, their steer previously and again this time is that committee weeks in the European Parliament are usually our best bet in terms of securing engagement, particularly with MEPs, and that did prove to be the case in June when we last visited. So in this case, that would be the weeks commencing either the 13th of April or the week commencing the 20th of April. Chair, of course, happy to take views from you and members on this, but I wonder in the first instance, would members be content to postpone that visit from March, and then I could write out to members and check availability for those weeks?
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Consent. That's great. Thanks. I'll turn then briefly to Westminster. A somewhat simpler update on that one. Members might remember that our proposed purpose for that visit was to engage directly with the UK government after its responses to the independent review and the Lords inquiry had been published and considered, and also potentially engaging again with the Lords Committee and NIAC as we did in June. Marie, I think, had updated members earlier this month that the government intends to bring forward legislation to deal with things like the time available for this committee to carry out scrutiny. And the Secretariat staff are hoping to meet with the Cabinet Office at the beginning of February. It looks like it'll be the second week of February, which should shed a bit more light on progress and timings. So again, happy to take views, but I would propose maybe if members are content that we allow the timings of that visit to be guided by what comes out of the discussions with Cabinet Office, and they might be able to give us a steer on when it would be useful for us to carry out that visit. But happy to take views, Chair, from yourself and from members.
I'm more than content with that.
Reasonable.
Yeah, no.
There's no point in going to discuss it unless we've got something to discuss.
Yeah. Aye, we'll have further clarity on that then, and after 2nd of February.
Perfect.
So is members content, yeah, with
That's great.
recommendations from Chris, yeah?
In that case, then I'll contact members and write out in terms of options and availability after we've had those discussions with the Cabinet Office. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So we're just going to move on then to item number 16, correspondence. Members, yesterday you received via email a copy of the correspondence from the Secretary of State to the Speaker regarding Regulation EU 2025-14 on the approval and market surveillance of non-road mobile machinery circulating on public roads. On the 2nd of February, the British Government and the European Commission will meet at the Joint Committee and make a decision to add this new EU Act to the Windsor Framework. The committee previously was notified of Article 51 of this regulation in January 2025 and decided not to hold an inquiry. Are members content to note the correspondence and publish the EM on the committee's web pages?
Happy to note.
Yeah, thank you, members. Obviously, members, as you're aware, in your pack there are 15 further items of correspondence. I'm going to draw your attention to 3 of these, if that's okay. Yeah. So item 6.1 and item 6.2 are both EMs from the British Government. Item 6.1 at page 238 of your meeting pack is on Regulation EU 2025-2645 on compulsory licensing for crisis management. And item 16.2 at page 247 of your meeting pack is on Regulation EU 2025-2650 as regards certain obligations of operators and traders. The committee was notified of these published EU acts and on the 8th of January decided not to hold inquiries. Can I advise members that both EMs will be uploaded on the committee web pages in line with agreed committee procedures? Are members content to note both EMs?
Yeah, happy.
Thank you, members. Item 16.4, page 257 to 263 of your meeting pack is an update from the Executive Office in relation to relevant proposed EU legislation. The table includes some published EU acts which have already been considered by the committee, and the committee had previously asked for such items to be removed. Are members content to ask that the next update from TEO does not include published acts which have already been notified and considered? Yeah.
Happy.
Thank you. And are members content to note the remaining items of correspondence?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, members. Just moving on then to item number 17, Chairperson's business. Can I advise members that the head of the European Parliament Liaison Office in the UK, Lena Linus, is planning to visit the Assembly, and she would be interested in meeting with members potentially on the 26th of March. Are members content and available to meet on that date? Maybe hopefully after this meeting? Yeah? Okay, thank you, members. Item number 18, any other business? Do members have any other business?
Yeah, I just wanted
Yes,
to
Steve?
raise one. Noticed in the yesterday in the Finance Committee declaration of interest, a member of the Committee for Finance, as is Owen, part of the correspondence was a letter that had come in from Lord Carlisle about particularly about carbon trading. Now, we haven't been notified of it, but the Economy Committee have been notified of it, and it was the issue to do with the single electricity market, whereas the UK government said there was no issue with carbon trading, yet Lord Carlisle said yes there is, because it definitely says in the Windsor framework there's an issue with that. Just want to know if it would be possible to get that correspondence circulated to us so we actually have it formally on our list, and to ask the question why we weren't included in the list on it, because I think that does come within the purview of the Windsor framework. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yes, okay, yes. We follow up with the Department of Finance. To seek a copy
committee.
of
No,
it, or the committee?
it was the Department. The Economy Committee shared it with the Department of
Oh, the Economy.
with the Finance Committee.
There is a item 16.6 is on the carbon border adjustment mechanism from in your packs today.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the
same.
same piece of correspondence. That's from Lord Carlisle.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, that might
Is
be
it?
it.
Was that
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Let me see. Let's see if that's the same one.
24th of December.
No, this one's later. This one's in January.
Updates on that, December?
Yeah. So would you like us to write to the Lords Committee and ask them to copy in on correspondence about
Just
CBAM?
ask the clerk from, well, if they could CC us on it, that would be good, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just item number 19, date and time of the next meeting. There's no notification, is there?
notifications, sorry.
So just to inform members that the committee has not been notified today in relation to any published EU acts, so therefore there will be no meeting of the committee next week. The next meeting is therefore provisionally scheduled to take place on the 12th of February at 10 a.m. in room 30 in Parliament Buildings. So that's, if members have no other business, that's the meeting adjourned, and thank you, members.
Thank you.